9 months ago, I made a video covering the classic Resident Evil Iceberg created by RE3. Usually other people look for other Resident Evil Icebergs to cover because it would be difficult with a community as big as the Resident Evil fanbase, especially with the Resident Evil 4 remake doing the impossible and a new CG film around the corner, Resident Evil Death Island. But the creator of the original Iceberg and supporter of the channel, RE3, created a side B to his original Iceberg, and we're covering that today. Now, if you didn't know, an iceberg is a wealth of information on a particular subject that's categorized by the most common information at the top, and the obscure and macabre information located below that. RE3's channel will be linked in the description below. He's helped tremendously with this video, and even I was shocked with the information he dug out. So with that being said, let's dive into the second volume of the classic Resident Evil Iceberg. Ink Ribbon. Ink Ribbon is a YouTuber with 175k subscribers. With a YouTube description that states Resident Evil's life, it's not a surprise that he mainly covers anything related to Resident Evil. He does fun fact videos, game reviews, and mod reviews. While he covers different games from time to time, his bread and butter are all things Resident Evil. Avalanche Reviews. Avalanche Reviews is a content creator with 169k subscribers. He reviews survival horror games that span from the 1990s to the modern day. In regards to Resident Evil, he began his Resident Evil retrospective in 2017, which is still going on. On top of reviewing each game, he goes more in depth than a normal reviewer. He touches on every port and compares every technical aspect between the ports. His passion for the franchise is felt in each video, but even the most knowledgeable Resident Evil fan will leave his video learning something new. Sphere Hunter. The Sphere Hunter is a creator with 505k subscribers. She's created retrospectives of Devil May Cry, Dead Space, and many more. This includes her reviews of the Resident Evil games. Her videos are well researched and well produced. While people assume that 20 reviews of the same game can be repetitive, it's her love for the franchise that makes each review fresh and engaging. Even her reviews of Resident Evil's more controversial games will garner your attention, tempting you to see them from a different point of view that's backed up rather well. Shinji Mikami. Shinji Mikami is one of the creators of Resident Evil. He directed Resident Evil, the original and the remake, and Resident Evil 4. He was also credited as the producer of the other classic Resident Evil games. Resident Evil was conceptualized as a remake of the NES survival horror RPG game, Sweet Home by Tokuro Fujiwara. Fujiwara decided to pick Shinji Mikami to direct the first Resident Evil game because he hated horror, and someone who hates horror is the best person to know what will scare people. Mikami is now seen as the father of the survival horror genre. This ends the first tier, and now onto the second one. Mansion Basement Music / Deaf Composer. After the release of the original Resident Evil in 1986, the game was released 2 other times, the Director's Cut in September of 97, and the DualShock version of the Director's Cut in August of 98. In the game's third re-release, composer Mamoru Samaguchi was brought in to rearrange the soundtrack to justify people triple dipping. This was also done to hold people over because of the delay of Resident Evil 2. This new soundtrack became infamous for many reasons, one being the memed upon Mansion Basement theme, which goes like this. The other reason why the soundtrack is now infamous is because of the composer himself. Mamoru Samaguchi had an ear condition that turned into complete hearing loss, but in 2011 he was exposed for lying about his deafness. He also had an unnamed composing partner who turned out to be Takashi Igaki, who did the brunt of the work for him. The Mansion Basement theme itself is infamous for its poor quality as a horror game track and is disrespectful to the original work, but it also has a story that spans decades that's equally as interesting. If you want to hear the full story, Justin Wang did a video on it, check it out. Noburu Sugimura. The original Resident Evil 2's development is a long story, but a great example of all good things take time. It went through 2 builds, the dubbed Resident Evil 1.5 and the Resident Evil 2 we all know and love. Resident Evil 2's script was written by Hideki Kamiya, and during the first build, Sugimura was brought on to punch up the script. Sugimura added plot points such as Chief Irons being bribed by Umbrella and overall being a psychopath. Sugimura will go on to write up scripts for the other Resident Evil games, which include the cancelled but not cancelled Resident Evil 0. This ends the second tier, and now onto the third one. RE2 N64 port. I went on a long tangent about Resident Evil 2's N64 port in Volume 1, but I'll never pass by the opportunity to gush about an impressive port. The PlayStation offered developers the power of the disc, which had more storage for the game, music, and cutscenes. Nintendo sticking to cartridges prevented cutscenes from being a part of the equation, among other things. But the team at Capcom and Angel Studios, which eventually became Rockstar San Diego, did some black magic because the N64 port of Resident Evil 2 includes every cutscene from the PlayStation original. Sure, they were compressed, but every cutscene was accounted for in a 64MB cartridge. Acting as a gift that keeps on giving, this port even included new content. This included 16 story files that tie the first game to the second game, which allowed people who have a PlayStation to get the full story. Resident Evil 2 on the N64 is one of the most impressive ports ever created, and it proved that a 64MB cartridge can be on par with a 700MB disc. Pablo Kuntz. Pablo Kuntz is the original Wesker voice actor in the PlayStation Classic. Like a lot of his former castmates, he's made a comeback to regular community projects. In 2021, he worked on a remake of Wesker's Report. Wesker's Report was originally released in 2003 and was bundled with the PS2 version of Resident Evil Code Veronica X. It acted as the story so far piece that was narrated by a longtime antagonist of the Resident Evil franchise, Wesker. Pablo Kuntz is also narrating the upcoming documentary about George A. Romero's unmade Resident Evil film. Shadow Leggy. Shadow Leggy is a YouTube animator with
107k
subscribers. She's known for her Resident Evil musical series, where she animates moments from the Resident Evil franchise with a musical edge. They also satirize general moments and characters. I never grew up with her videos, but discovering them now, they're well animated and have a fun energy to them. Personally, I grew up with Yeti 112's Resident Evil parody videos, and they definitely give off the same vibes. ScorePN. ScorePN is a YouTuber with 165k subscribers. They cover a myriad of franchises, but they also cover a lot of Resident Evil content. Unlike Ink Ribbon, ScorePN also covers the Resident Evil comics, which highlight niche Resident Evil lore. They even created their own Resident Evil comic and covered it on their channel. This ends the third tier, and now onto the fourth one. RE3 Civilian Deaths. 1999's Resident Evil 3 Nemesis begins before Resident Evil 2 and ends after it, so this allows the players to see the open cascade of Raccoon City with dead civilians placed in certain spots in the game. The opening cutscene shows civilians being overtaken by the horde of the undead. In the beginning hour, you see a corpse being devoured by zombies, and in the clock tower, you see one of the dead umbrella mercenaries holding onto a dead girl. Resident Evil 3 is known as the beginning of Resident Evil's transition to the action genre, but it still knows how to break your heart without words. There are also certain random events in the early part of the game where a female civilian is chased by zombies into an alleyway and eventually devoured. No matter how fast Jill runs towards her, she sadly cannot be saved. Celebrity lookalikes. This one is pretty straightforward. Certain Resident Evil characters in the classic trilogy have either looked like certain actors or were inspired by them. Albert Wesker is David Bowie, Chris Redfield is either Tom Cruise or Sylvester Stallone, Barry Byrne is Chuck Norris, Jill Valentine is Linda Hamilton, Leon S. Kennedy is Leonardo DiCaprio, and so on and so forth. Who was Inez? / The search for the Resident Evil 1 cast. Inspired by another Justin Wing video, the original Resident Evil cast was not like modern voice actors. There wasn't social media, and a lot of the actors usually went by aliases because at the end of the day, it was a job for them. So finding the actors for the original cast of Resident Evil was difficult to say the least. For example, Chris Redfield's original voice actor, Charlie Kraslavsky, was credited as Charlie in the game's credits. The aforementioned Pablo Kuntz was not even credited, but his FMV counterpart was, so it was a mess to say the least. Over the years, the original cast has been rediscovered, except Jill's actor, who was credited as Inez. To this day, people haven't found her, and I think at one point someone did, but she declined to do an interview, which is understandable. Inez's performance as Jill will forever be iconic, and it got me to ask my parents for a blue beret when I was 9 or 10. I hope she's doing well. This ends the fourth tier, and before we enter the fifth tier, I want to take this moment to thank those who got this far in the video. If you like this video and you want to see more, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss the next video. Engagement helps the video get shown to more people, so I'd appreciate it. Now, back to the show. Win a role in the new Resident Evil movie. This was a promo sticker that was placed on the DualShock version of Resident Evil 2, as well as several strategy guides and promotional merchandise for Resident Evil 2 and 3. Supposedly, those are sweepstakes where fans can enter to win a role as an extra in the then upcoming George Romero Resident Evil movie. This was canned around the same time Romero's script was, and it's unknown if anyone ever won the sweepstakes to begin with. Resident Evil Japanese theme park attraction. In the 1990s, there was a theme park dark ride / haunted house attraction based on the first two Resident Evil games, with props, costumed actors, and animatronic monsters that was only found in Japan. There's a handful of old home video clips showcasing the attraction, but not much is known about it. Surprisingly enough, when Roy showed me the list of new entries, I thought it was about the Universal Studios Japan attraction Resident Evil The Real, which I covered a few years ago, but to learn that there were more Resident Evil attractions is really cool, and I hope we get more of them in the future. I'm still hoping that Universal Studios brings the Halloween Horror Nights house back, but a man can dream. Resident Evil 1 locations are movie references. The different areas of Resident Evil 1 in the original PS1 release are generally designed after locations from movies. The Spencer Mansion is based on the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. The Courtyard is based on the Hedge Gardens from the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola version of Dracula. The Guardhouse is based on the farmhouse from the 1990 Night of the Living Dead remake. The underground tunnels are based on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the lab is based on the bunker from Day of the Dead. More specific rooms that are movie references include the dining room, which is based on the 1979 Dracula movie, and the Tyrant Gestation room, which is based on a room from Sylvester Stallone's Judge Dredd movie. Judge Dredd will live in my head rent-free to the end of time because of the Nostalgia Critic review and its tangential tie to the Resident Evil franchise. This ends the fifth tier, and now onto the sixth one. Resident Evil clones. After the release of the first Resident Evil, there were a variety of games for the PS1, Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, and even the PS2 and GameCube that all tried to emulate the tank-control survival horror of the early Resident Evil games, especially after RE2 became a smash hit. Some of these include games such as Galarians, Martian Gothic, Evil Dead Hail to the King, Deep Fear, The Exiles, Resist or Serve, Ill Blood, Countdown Vampires, Vampire Hunter D, Star Trek Hidden Evil, and even a non-horror game called Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn, which was more of a military action shooter in the vein of Tom Clancy novels. A Star Trek survival horror-esque game sounds too good to be true, so I'm adding that to the list of videos I'll make eventually, probably in 20 years, who knows. RE2 Manhwa. What is manhwa? Manhwas are comics that originate from South Korea. The most popular example of manhwas are comics found on webtoons. The RE2 manhwa refers to a 62-volume manhwa that was initially based on RE2 that came out in 1998, but then widely diverged from the source material after the 15th volume. The first 15 or so volumes retell the story of RE2, but then it becomes a sci-fi fantasy high-stakes adventure set in a high-tech floating city with a Greco-Roman aesthetic with heavy influences from 80s and 90s shonen fantasy anime. Leon even develops Saiyan-esque powers from the G-Virus in the manhwa's later chapters. Scorpion has an excellent video on this manhwa in even greater detail. Thomas Wilde's Plot Analysis Guide. Thomas Wilde was a major figure within the early Resident Evil fandom in the 1920s, going above and beyond to find all official information he could about the series, and did an extensive plot analysis guide that was continually updated and expanded through the 90s and 2000s. The latest iteration was updated around 2012 or so, ending with Resident Evil 6, and sadly not updating since then. The various iterations of this plot analysis guide can be still found on GameFAQs and NeoSeeker among other sites. This ends the 6th tier, and now onto the final one. Resident Evil Childhood fan film. Resident Evil Childhood is a fan film that was released in 2020, but largely filmed in 1998. Three brothers with nothing more than a VHS camcorder, some toys in their imagination, made these fan films showing them LARP-esque characters from Resident Evil, acting out scenarios as Chris, Leon, and the various monsters and antagonists. These tapes were found by the brothers in 2012 and were in excellent condition. During the pandemic in 2020, they decided to transfer all the footage to a digital format, added some cheapo CGI effects for comedic value, and edit all into one coherent movie. The film can be seen in its entirety on YouTube. The Chronicles of Hunk fan film. The Chronicles of Hunk was a YouTube fan film made around 2007. It's supposed to be a prequel explaining who Hunk is and how he got involved with Umbrella, as well as his first mission on China Island against a mad science gone rogue. The film features a lot of music from the classic rock band Creedence Clearwater Revival. Satanic Wesker theory in Code Veronica. In the early days of the Resident Evil fandom, before Wesker's report or other aspects of the wider lore became more well known, there's a fan theory that said Wesker made a literal deal with the devil to avoid dying, and that he and the HCF mercenaries under his command worked for Satan himself during the events of Code Veronica. Thomas Wilde made a brief reference to it in one of his editions of the Plot Analysis Guide. This theory is debunked and largely forgotten now, but it was semi-canon back in the early 2000s. Some fans have theorized the theory became popular because the PS2 version of Code Veronica came with a demo for the first Devil May Cry, and some fans just assumed they took place in the same universe at the time. Resident Evil Behind the Mask fanfiction. This is an ongoing fanfiction on Archive of Our Own, or AO3, that as of 2023 has yet to be completed, but is still being actively updated by its author, Modred v Britannia. It's a very bizarre fanfiction that crosses over the early PS1 Resident Evil games, most notably Resident Evil Survivor, the dubbed anime Card Captors, and the 1973 film The Wicker Man. What the f***? Resident Evil Behind the Mask is an intentionally surreal fanfic that is meant to be a reimagining of the events of Resident Evil Survivor, but is not canon, obviously. In fact, it's apparently set in its own alternate universe and blends a lot of surrealist imagery, supernatural elements such as ghosts, and bizarre cult conspiracies involving the druids of ancient Celtic civilization. It's a bit of a jukebox musical with song lyrics from rock songs and folk songs incorporated in the early chapters. I promised myself I would never touch Wattpad or AO3, but I'm tempted to check this out for a video or for some fun, I don't know. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to Retroboy for creating the original and expanded version of the Iceberg and creating the video with me. Rabbit holes are never ending, so I'm excited to once again enter the world of horror whenever Roy makes a part 3. His channel will be linked here and in the description below. I'd like to also thank my patrons, Leo Currit and Retroboy for supporting the channel, and for $1 a month, your name will show up right here. If you get the 5 patrons, I will subject myself to 50 Shades of Grey, the novel, to you all, either as a review or reading a spicy scene. With all that in mind, love you guys and shalom.